Hey, work from homers, Adam Schroeder here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa with Adam Schroeder. Today we have Elizabeth Lesser on our show. She's a co-founder and senior advisor at the Omega Institute. It's the largest adult education center in the United States, focusing on health, wellness, spirituality, and creativity. She's a popular TED Talk speaker, one of Oprah's Super Soul 100 and New York Times bestselling author of Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow, as well as the bestselling author of Marrow, a love story, The Seeker's Guide, Making Your Life a Spiritual Adventure, and the new book, Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers, The Human Story Changes. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
Thanks a lot. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, in your most popular book, Broken Open, How Difficult Times Can Help Us Grow. Let's first start with that book, because I think the year 2020 and even 2021, not as much as 2020, but it was a very difficult time. And I think a lot of people had to grow. In fact, I would say a majority of the population had to grow. They may not have had health problems, or they may not have had financial problems, but they had to make a lot of adjustments. They had to adapt to the changing circumstances. So 2020 was a difficult year for a large chunk of our listeners and the global population. We're in over 20 different countries now. What are your tips to take that experience and to grow?
Yeah, 2020 was hard, and I think 2021 is not going to be that much easier. Or let's put it this way, it's going to be packed with opportunities to grow. I know, like, it's cliche to say that difficult times come to us so we can grow, and it's not always the most fun thing to hear when you're in the middle of a difficult time. But it does seem to be the way us humans learn and grow through difficulty. You know, people will say, I've said it myself, I didn't know who I was until I got divorced and had to go through that pain. Or people will say my cancer taught me everything I had to learn. And I sure hope that the pandemic and all the problems our country is going through, this country, the United States, I sure hope it can teach us a lot of things. The most important way I have learned to use my difficult times to grow is, first of all, not to fight the difficult times, not to have this sense of, why me? Why is this happening to me? Why our times? Why did this have to come and interrupt my life? Whether it's the pandemic or the loss of a job, the more we fight what's happened to us and think that there's something kind of weird and wrong with us, the harder it becomes. That's why I'm such a fan of something like mindfulness meditation, which is this capacity you begin to train into yourself to relax into the difficulty instead of fighting it. You know, it's like you're in a river and you're paddling against the direction the water is moving. So many of us do that. Difficult times come our way and we're just thrust into this. No, it's like a tantrum. So one of the best first things to do is to stop having a tantrum and to realize this happened, this is happening, and to relax into it.
So I want to go back a decade ago. You had your TED Talk, Take the Other to Lunch, where you called for civility and understanding as we negotiated our differences as human beings. Now, that was a decade ago, and I would have to venture out and say it's probably safe to assume that nobody's taking the other out to lunch, or very few are taking the others out to lunch.
TED Talk.
How has that message changed or even more applicable today than it was when you first gave the TED Talk?
Yeah, I mean, you might say, oh, I was prescient giving a TED Talk 10 years ago saying we need to talk to each other. We need to talk about our differences instead of against our differences. We just need to humanize each other. Well, it didn't, as you say, things have gotten way worse. 10 years ago, I think, well, it was when the Tea Party was really strong in America and myself being more of a progressive type. I had taken a person I know who was a Tea Party activist in my area. I'd taken her to lunch so we could just humanize each other. We weren't trying to change each other. We just did not want to slip into what I call otherizing, dehumanizing each other. And so we became friends, and we learned to live with each other's differences, even appreciate each other's differences. Now, and then I thought, wow, this would be a good thing for everyone to learn how to do, because we had set some ground rules for what our lunch was going to be like. We weren't going to try to change each other. We weren't going to interrupt each other. We were going to meet each other's differences with respect and curiosity. And the outcome wasn't going to be one or the other of us changing what we thought. It was going to be that each of us might have grown a little bit through it. So I created all these guidelines, and I gave a very popular TED Talk about it. And people are asking me now, well, how does it work now in this situation where we're actually getting two different visions of reality? If you watch Fox News and I watch CNN, we are talking across an even bigger gulf because we don't even believe in reality as the same way. Well, I still think it's just as important now, if not more important, to do the courageous, brave act. It may seem little, it may not seem important, but I think it's more important than being an activist or an elected official. If each one of us were to find a person who was really different, whether it's a different politics, race, religion, gender, climate change, anything that you like really activates you and agitates you, don't find a crazy person. Don't find somebody who's so aggressive and nasty and mean-spirited that it wouldn't work. Just find a regular old schmo who believes differently than you and see if you can find each other's humanity. We're never going to live without difference. We're always going to have different opinions. So we got to learn how to live together.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I feel like a lot of people in society forget is even the people who have different ideas for us. Let's take political issues, for example. Even people who have vastly political ideas than us, they don't have those ideas as a way of tearing down the nation or, destroying what we have. They believe that because they think that's what's best for the country. You may completely disagree with it, but you have to come at them with the mindset of they believe this because they think it's for the best.
Absolutely. Like I posted something on my author's Facebook page, and I got my second vaccine shot. And I said, how excited I was to get the vaccine shot. And I hope everybody else is doing their part to be a good citizen and getting their vaccine so we can stop this pandemic. Well, someone wrote to me very kindly, very respectfully. My feelings were hurt by you assuming that I was not doing what was best for my country if I don't believe in getting a vaccine shot. So I proceeded to answer her, and we were, in a curious way, we were trying to understand each other. Well, what it generated and until I shut it down on my Facebook page, was this war between like here the two of us were like trying to model a way to be like, that's interesting, why do you think that way? And suddenly people were just hurling the most really cruel and incendiary comments at each other. It's really gotten out of hand.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I just feel like social media is the worst place to be civil, and so really it's reached the point to where nowhere. You said you're going out with your friends, you guys set rules. That's probably a good way to do it, like a small intimate group around a dinner table. You set rules. But once you're on social media, you're working from home. Our listeners are working from home. They're probably passing time in between work by going on Facebook and Twitter, and it's it's gotten so argumentative and so, I mean, you're behind a computer, so you can type whatever you want and actually share your true feelings and your true thoughts. And it's just not a good place. And it ends up tying into your book and spirituality. It just ends up getting you angry. It ends up getting other people angry. I mean, I've lost friends of decades because they, like you gave the vaccine example. I'm one of those people who, as of right now, I'm not vaccinated and I'm not planning to get vaccinated. But I have friends who unfriended me or blocked me because of my reasons, whether it's that or something else, some other political topic. And they hurled all sorts of names at me without even reading what I had to say.
Okay,
And
so like, I know your podcast is about like real things, actual things people can do. So I just want to unpack this for a minute. So you said, I'm not even getting vaccinated. And I felt in my like heart and body this rising up of like, how could he not get vaccinated? And then because of the work, the spiritual, physical, psychological, whatever you want to call it, work that I have engaged in for most of my life, I kind of within like a 40-second period of time after you said that, I felt that in my body. I felt my heart beating a little bit. And I thought to myself very quickly, because I've trained myself in this, that's not a helpful reaction. Just calm your nervous system down and be with this other human being who is a intelligent, legitimate, fine person. I mean, I've never met you, but I can just assume, I'm going to assume this. And so this is what spiritual work, let's call it, or psychological work, I don't know how your listeners would call it. This is what it's all about in real life. Learning how to modify your reactivity, to have a pause between your reaction and your words, and to remain in an open and curious state of being so that there isn't so much conflict and tension in the world.
yeah, and I want to follow that up because we use an example that is a personal choice. You know, my body, my choice. Okay, but how about for something that's more fact-based? So let's say, for example, someone says, policemen are all murderers and killers. They're all racist and they're just terrible people. And they are the biggest threat to this country. I mean, this is actually a post that I've seen people write this on social media. And now we've gone from what you said, okay, I want to empathize with this person. I want to see where they're coming from, get my feelings in order, to this is just incorrect. I mean, this is factually incorrect.
Okay, yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well, First of all, one of my steadfast rules is don't make assumptions. So first I have to check, did that person really say that? And if that's what that person said, well, that person's wrong. And is that person someone worth my engaging with, or is that person like so far out that I'm just going to let that person go? That's not worth it. It's just going to end in more agitation. But the assumption that one shouldn't make is that, let's say, everyone who won't get vaccinated is a QAnon follower. Okay. Everyone who says something like some policemen are racist, there are people who live in the fringes and they aren't worth trying to bring into the middle. But most people live in the middle if we can learn how to talk to each other. So, yes, there are people who believe incorrectly that all police are blah, blah, blah. But most people don't believe that.
So how do people actually go about the process? Like, what are some of the steps people need to take to reach the point where they can, have discussions with people that they disagree with, and they can grow as a person to, as you were talking about, kind of push down that initial visceral reaction,
right,
and to really look at the deeper issue and really start connecting? Are there any kind of exercises or tips you have for people who are looking to do that?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of mindfulness meditation, which now, I've been at it for 40 years. I was one of those early adapters way back before, when people thought meditation meant, staring at crystals and chanting Om. But I'm a great fan of the science of mindfulness meditation, which is a way of observing yourself. Which is a way of observing your own reactivity and taking responsibility for it in each moment. So I would say, if you're a super reactive person who's finding yourself really agitated by what's going on today, and different issues just like plugging you in and triggering you all the time, so that your blood pressure is rising and you're losing friends and family members, I would consider learning how to meditate and learning how to quiet your reactivity and keep yourself open so that you can navigate these times. Sometimes I will just take my hand, put it on my chest, and pat a little, kind of like the way you'd pat the top of your dog's head or your baby, kind of just saying like, it's okay, it's all right, you can handle this. It's a sort of self-forgiveness of your own reactivity, because sometimes we can feel so awful about ourselves because a lot of us are acting in ways we're not proud of. So just kind of like calming yourself that way when you feel that triggering response coming up toward whole swaths of people that you've never even met, and you're making these grand assumptions about people. And the other thing is, there's this word I hear a lot, proximity. People are using it a lot these days, which means purposefully putting yourself into relationship with people not like you. So if what you're triggered a lot about is the question about policing right now, or vaccines, or men and women, the whole stuff about climate change. Let's say you don't believe in climate change and your nephew does, and you haven't talked to him in a year because you just like can't bring yourself to do it. I would say do it. Create some guidelines for yourselves, and courageous conversations are really hard for us human beings. The book I wrote before my recent one, Marrow, is about, I was my sister's bone marrow donor. She had lymphoma, and the only treatment left for her was to get a bone marrow transplant, and I was the sibling who tested as her match. And before we went into this really gruesome process together of having my bone marrow extracted and put into her, we decided to do some difficult conversations with each other that we'd never had. We'd always had some tension because we wanted our cells, once my bone marrow cells were in her body, we wanted them to get along. When we found out the science that maybe my cells would attack her or hers would reject me, we thought, wow, attack and rejection. This is what siblings do with each other. So we did a few therapy sessions together where we had someone helping us have this difficult conversation. And we found out some of the most simple things just through talking to each other, like, why did you reject me during this time when I was going through such a terrible time in my life? Why did you say this? Stuff we'd never unpacked, and instead built these stories about each other. This is what humans do. We build stories about each other, and then they become solid. So we undid the storytelling until all that was left was our love for each other. And I think everybody can do that. We don't have to wait for catastrophe to have difficult conversations, drop the assumptions, and try to be human together.
What are your tips to break free and blossom into what we are meant to be? What are your tips for realizing full potential? The classic saying, be all that you can be.
There's so many ways to do it. My first book, which is called The Seeker's Guide, I had spent years running this conference and retreat center. I'd been like a kid in a candy shop, learning all these different techniques. And I wanted to make it a little easier for people. So I divided all these different tools and tips into what I called 4 landscapes of the journey. And there's the landscape of the body, mind, heart, and soul. Because, it used to be when there was, what are you? Well, I'm a Christian or I'm a Jew. And there were these set ways to grow and be a moral person and the best person you can be. But now, there's tons of things. There's physical ways to become your best self. And a lot of the things often that block us from being our best self are in the body. We're tired, we're sluggish, we're in pain. Some people have a lot of shame about their body. So some of the great work to do is exercise and diet and yoga and weight training and therapy to unlock secrets that are held in your body. Then there's mind, this landscape of the mind, and the tools in there are things like meditation and ways to control your anxiety and your confusion and all of your inability to let go of things you're holding on. And then there's the landscape of the heart, and that is where we learn how to be more emotionally intelligent. Our relationship work and grief work. There's a lot of grief in people that has never been metabolized, and it kind of eats you from within. And then the final landscape is the landscape of the soul, which is the mystery landscape, and that's where prayer and scriptures and any ways that we can learn to dwell in a greater universe than just our little difficult lives, where we expand our consciousness.
Can you talk a little bit about the Omega Institute that you helped start and what you run, and how y'all have been, what you've seen people needing help with during the pandemic that they didn't need help or as much help with before?
Yeah, well, we've needed help ourselves because we are a gathering place. So therefore, we have had to been shut down. We've been shut down now for a year and a half. We've had to, we lost most of our income. We've had to let go of most of our staff. It's been a very trying time. So we've needed the same kind of help that we've found ourselves striving to offer the hundreds of thousands of people who rely on us. So, one thing is the pivot we've all made to the online space, which has been a steep learning curve for so many people. And it's been difficult, but it's also been remarkable. It's been something that has really demonstrated the resilience and the creativity of the human spirit, that there's a hunger for community. People need each other. That's one thing I feel I've learned, and everyone has learned. Like, we need each other. We need community. We need ways of learning together, grieving together, growing together, things like funerals and graduations, all the things we've missed. So we have worked really hard to create spaces of community online where like-minded people can learn together and be in forums together, dealing with questions of all the things that I just went through in all the four landscapes of the spiritual journey. I think more than anything, what people have needed is a sense of belonging and ways to be together.
Elizabeth, I want to talk about your latest book, Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers, The Human Story Changes. Let's first start with the physiological, psychological, and biological differences between men and women in the workplace and in family care.
Wow, that's a big question. Men and women are very different. On the soul level, we're all the same. We're all these half-baked creatures who come into a world without an instruction book, and we're like, how do we live? What do we do? How do we be together? What does it mean to be a moral human? Like, we've been struggling with these questions and stories since the beginning of time. And most of the stories, whether they're religious stories or mythologies or literature or even science, they've all been written by men. And that doesn't mean those stories are unworthy, but a whole different value system has either been left out or devalued, belittled. In my book, Cassandra Speaks, I go through a lot of the formative stories, whether it's Adam and Eve or Pandora or Cassandra, stories that everyone hears as children and onward. And I show how they really have not served the value system of women. And there's a story that's actually a science story that really illustrates your question of the differences between men and women at work and otherwise. And that's, how we say under stress and under trauma, human beings either fight or flee, the fight or flight idea. It's an accepted scientific framework of looking at humanity. Well, that idea came into existence in the 1940s when a Harvard social scientist, PhD psychologist, brought a lot of people into the laboratory and simulated stressful situations and then measured their blood, the hormones and the other chemicals released in the bloodstream under these simulated stressful situations. And Dr. Cannon measured the blood and came up with this idea that what's released is this either fight, this aggressive hormones and chemicals, or this flee, not just literally running away, but also detaching, withdrawing. And so for years, that's what we said about humans. Under stress, humans either fight or flee. And, a lot of our society is based around how do you deal with the fact that that's what humans do. But in the early 2000s, a doctor at UCLA, Shelley Taylor, took a look at the research and realized something. All of the people in the study were men. because in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, up until recently, only men were used in medical and psychological studies. So she duplicated those studies with women. And sure enough, what was released in women's bloodstreams were different hormones. And she came up with the saying, tend and befriend, that under stress, what's released in women is this desire to tend to the more vulnerable in the community. Something terrible is happening, and our first instinct is to tend to the kids and the babies and the old people and the people who can't take care of themselves. Or also befriend, women, when things get rough, we talk to each other, we create circles of friendship, we help each other through, instead of like retreating, coming home from a hard day at work and you just like get a beer and watch television. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what women usually do. So that is, when I say stories, when women are the storytellers, the human story changes. That is a story that we have to all know, that more than 50% of the people in the world have another way of dealing with stress. Now, not all women are like this and all men, but that value system of tending as opposed to fighting is a way of being that I feel needs to be the core competency now of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the tendencies of women and the tendencies of men would complement each other pretty well, because, if there was a horrible situation, you would need to fight it off and you would need to tend to the people who needed tending.
If we make tending have a lot of muscle and clout and respect, we won't have as many situations where we have to fight. I'm interested in the tending instinct to get elevated. Like you walk through a park and you see all these statues of generals and soldiers, and I'd like to walk through a park and see as many statues of people tending to each other, statues of nurses, statues of mommies, so that we're like, those are our heroes too.
As the landscape of work especially has changed since the 50s and 60s, and more women have entered the workplace, there's been a huge, I would say, psychological strain on women as they balance, especially women, balance the new, kind of new workplace environment that they're in with the fact that there's, the whole human history where they were the primary caregivers and having to balance the work-life balance. How do you see people successfully doing that, and how can men help with that process, and kind of what do you see happening there?
Nice. Well, I have 3 sons, and they all have children. They're all married with children. And so I'm getting to see how fatherhood is changing from when I was a kid and even when I had my kids. They are as emotionally engaged and effective fathers as their wives are mothers. In 2 of the cases, my daughters-in-law make more money and are more skilled in their work than my sons, who are more of the primary parent.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it is with, well, at least in my house. Naresh is kind of a stay-at-home dad, but I'm a stay-at-home dad, and my wife makes way more than me.
Mm-hmm. It's similar here too. It's similar in that I do most of the child care duties.
Well, I see you guys as like my heroes. I think, how can we help change it? Exactly what you're doing. Because when it's no longer like men as sort of like, yeah, I'll help you, honey, I'll be the babysitter. Everything will change when things in the home change. I think that's where it all starts. And so the workplace, our workplaces are going to have to catch up with what men and women are doing at home now, so that there can be split jobs, and there's childcare at work, and we begin to value the family, because we're never going back to women staying home and baking cookies, even if we thought that was the best thing to do. That's not going to happen. And it's been a boon to society to have women in the workplace. And I think it's been a boon to society to have men at home caring for kids, so that, as you say, women and men can complement each other. So that's my, when men and women both start demanding that workplaces change to accommodate the family, then things will start to change. But men have to be demanding it as much as women.
As far as your predictions, or not as far as, but what are your predictions over the next 50 years when it comes to women and where you see the gender going as far as business goes?
I think when women become less ashamed to admit that we have ambition, and that ambition is not unfeminine, women will enter the workplace more and more. Elected officials will be women more and more. And I think that will change things, not because all women are the same and all women have the same feelings and ideas or politics, but I think the tend and befriend instinct will have more of an opportunity to be equally respected, budgeted, seen as heroic instincts, as the older ways of thinking of heroism and strength and power. And we'll all start to do power differently. And I think that'll be a good thing.
Excellent. Well, Elizabeth Lesser, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. This has been a truly engaging discussion. The website is elizabethlesser.org. That's elizabethlesser.org. Also, the Omega Institute's website is eomega.org, eomega.org. Elizabeth, any final thoughts or anything else you want to promote to our listeners?
No, let's just go to lunch.
I agree. For everyone listening, let's go to lunch. Let's set those rules, set those boundaries, and just be at ease with each other.
Yeah. What a nice way to say it. Be at ease with each other.
Yes.
That is beautiful.
Yes. Well, that's why you're one of Oprah's Super Soul 100. Check out her books on Amazon. Multiple New York Times bestselling author. Many of these have hit #1 on different lists. The latest book is Cassandra Speaks, When Women Are the Storytellers. The Human Story Changes. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. And to all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. Email us if you have any questions. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Leave us a review on whatever podcasting platform you use. And until next week, keep on working from home.